Hello there, and a welcome of Indeterminate Temperature to this, the latest edition of the DF Direct Q&A show. Lots to discuss this week, primarily about the fact that next-generation consoles, well, they don't seem to be having much going for them at this point. Discussing this and a lot of other topics, myself and, of course, Oliver Mackenzie.
Yes, there's a lot of doom and gloom surrounding next-gen console speculation and rumors at the moment. I'm trying to maintain a sort of cautiously optimistic stance, but the rumors and vibes are not good at the moment, I gotta say.
Yeah, absolutely. And, of course, John Linneman.
Yes, Rich. I would agree. The vibes are not good at the moment, and there's a lot of reasons for it, and a lot of it is external to the game industry. So, yeah, we'll see what happens, but still.
Yeah, okay. Well, let's crack on with our first question. But first, this. DF Direct Weekly is brought to you in partnership with Alienware. The latest state-of-the-art Alienware Area 51 delivers a flagship reborn with a focus on extreme high-quality design, cutting-edge silicon and thermal precision, and it's available now. In addition to top-end GPUs, the new Area 51 also supports AMD's Ryzen 9000 X3D processors, from the 9800 X3D up to and including the new 9950 X3D2. Ryzen 9000 X3D processors deliver by far and away the best CPU gaming performance we've tested to date and are a key recommendation for a high-spec gaming PC. And to keep performance sustained at the highest level, Alienware has overhauled the internals with a new gasket architecture. The system uses a combination of 180 and 140mm fans to create positive pressure, moving 25% more air while remaining 45% quieter than prior generations. Combined with a 1500 watt platinum PSU and enough thermal headroom to handle the 600 watt power draw of the RTX 5090, the new Area 51 is built for the absolute limit of modern PC gaming. Okay, so let's just dive headlong into the topic here. We've got a couple of questions here. We're going to group them together since it's pretty much covering the same content. This one from some guy person. You guys mentioned that you feel we're about to see a massive cross-gen period for the next 6+ years, which I agree with. If you take the Switch 2 as the baseline platform to target, you can easily run your game at 60 FPS on current gen consoles. We already know this. So the main question is, what will the next generation of consoles do that will make people want to buy them? If future games will mostly run at 60 FPS, what will the PS6 do that usurps the PS5 Pro? Better 120Hz support? Better upscaling? Path tracing? I don't see the masses clamoring to pay over $1,000 for some better image quality, even though the people making and watching this channel care very deeply about it. And Alan, the infamous Alan from the Discord, gets straight to it. Hi guys, you talked about cheap ways to get into gaming. John said the 5 Pro could sell out if people rush to get one for GTA 6. But is a 5 Pro with a disk drive not the most cost-effective option to get into gaming now and not bothering with PS6? You'd be able to play all PS4, very cheap physical games, PS5 games with better RT, etc., but also with a 5 Pro be able to get halfway into the PS6 generation. All you'll be losing is better RT and other lighting and dynamic effects. You would also be able to add PSVR 2 as well if you want. I'm going to go to you first on this, Oliver, because this is an interesting question, right? Because you know, the concept of having a new games console is very, very exciting, but we kind of know what's coming because, well, effectively NVIDIA has blazed the trail, so to speak, with the RTX feature set over the past few years. Is that exciting enough for a next generation console, and does it justify a $1,000 console? What do you think?
I think it justifies a $1,000 console to a specific limited slice of gamers. Probably a more limited slice than PlayStation 5 did, or PlayStation 4, likewise with Series over Xbox One last generation, because I think probably you're going to see a range of fairly iterative upgrades. Like, I think you're going to see more 4K 120 support. I think you're going to see support, period, for 4K 240, probably. Some aspect of the HDMI 2.2 spec there. I think you're going to see ray tracing support furthered, but not in any ways that are like necessarily enormous, at least not initially, because when you look at current generation games, a lot of them are using RTGI, RT reflections. They're already kind of hitting the like low-hanging fruit of game graphics, the stuff that you could really easily improve with ray tracing, and the improvement from like adding in RT shadows, things like that, improving fidelity further. It can be iterative in nature, especially initially. I expect it to be more iterative in nature. And I do think there is probably a real open question here beyond that as to exactly how these consoles will be marketed and exactly what people expect out of them, because I think we do see a lot of what we want out of the current generation consoles, especially PS5 Pro. And going to next generation, I'm really not sure how much of that you can really advertise to players as something being genuinely new instead of something that's just an iterative upgrade that is not really selling the console that much. But I would caution people like Alan against the PS5 Pro route possibly, because like I actually did cover a fair number of cross-generation games after this generation of consoles launched. And I think we saw pretty consistent trends with consoles like the Xbox One X, where initially they were being supported very well, and then over time they were becoming badly underserved, where developers were not taking good advantage of the hardware, and games were often running with very similar visual settings to the base console counterparts they had that generation, right? So I would not expect developers to be rolling out the red carpet for PlayStation 5 Pro in the way they have as a way to advertise their games into like 2029 or 2030. I expect those to be much more perfunctory ports. I don't actually expect developers to be expending, all the effort in the world to port over all the great ray tracing features and PSSR2 and all this jazz to their PS5 Pro console versions. So yeah, I'm not sure that's a terribly optimistic set of remarks there. But in general, for next generation consoles, I kind of think it's incumbent on the platform holder and the platform holders rather, and the game publishers and the game developers to really show us something exciting. Because so far, if you look at the PC titles that are out there, I think we're not really seeing as much excitement. We're seeing more iterative steps up that the enthusiasts will value, but the mainstream probably will not.
Yeah, John, ultimately it comes down to software, doesn't it? And if the route forward is that you're still going to be able to play the same games on your last generation machines, do things like 120 hertz and path tracing make the grade as like a proper generational upgrade? I'm not so sure.
Nah, I don't think so. And actually, before addressing all that, I do want to mention I actually disagree with Oliver on the thing about the Pro, and I'll tell you why. As things go on, let's say they stop supporting Pro officially, or they don't do anything special for it. What it still offers instead is essentially removing performance constraints by and large. We've seen this with so many games that only were developed for just PS5, not Pro. Any game that had performance issues or some kind of problems like that has largely been fixed. It basically just solved those problems, right? And I think that right there is the benefit, in that it's essentially like a cushion. It's like a performance cushion. So even if you don't get extra features with the Pro, you're still getting a higher performance ceiling that can sort of smooth out any potential problems. And in fact, I might argue that by not specifically supporting the Pro, you could end up with a better experience in general, since we've seen before where implementing Pro features could sometimes reduce performance, although that's not a huge issue this generation, thankfully. So I don't think that's a bad strategy there for that reason specifically. But I think we're at a pretty difficult spot right now. And we're talking about this before anything has been announced, right? Nothing is really known about what these new machines will be, and a lot of this hinges on what they're going to offer. I think a lot of us fear that this is the last generation of consoles in the way that we knew them, but there's a lot of reasons for that fear, and the game industry in general is kind of in a tough spot. So one, obviously there's the cost of components, very, very high right now, right? How do you actually create a box like this now and sell it at a reasonable price? I'm not sure you can. So the price is going to be very high at a time when economy's not doing that great. Things are not great for a lot of people. So a very expensive box that's not easy for a lot of people to afford. Instant strike one. Secondly, games themselves, the big stuff, the stuff that gets people interested. I think this generation, people realize that it's just taking forever for the stuff to appear in a way that it's the worst it's ever been. And there are some reasons for that, including the pandemic, but you no longer can expect to get new software from your favorite studio in a timely fashion. You maybe get one game a generation at best, is what it feels like now. In some cases, not every developer, which is a bit disheartening. So people have gotten more used to this release cadence. Then there's the threat from the forever games, like stuff like Roblox, Minecraft, the usual suspects, which I would say, you look at Roblox, Roblox is a console. It's a new style of console. It is not an individual game. It is a place that people go. It's where they spend the time. It's really like Sony, Microsoft, they may as well look at the audience playing Roblox as a non-addressable audience. Even if they're using their hardware, that audience is largely not addressable. They will not purchase your products outside of maybe the hardware because they are invested in this other thing, right? So that's another potential issue, dealing with that. And that also ties into targeting the younger generation. We're reaching a point now where like the game consoles as we know them are kind of built around concepts and ideas that we were raised on, right? And it's like the 80s and 90s, 2000s, like this style of like release a box, here's a bunch of new software for it. You get that experience. Games you like usually would get like sequels and follow-ups within a pretty short window. It kind of had this like cadence, but now we've reached this point where people are either not interested in console gaming or they're just sticking with specific games and that's all they ever play. And that's a huge amount of audience and there's a lot of money to be made there. They may never have wanted to play these other games, right? This is the kind of thing that they could have been into long term, but companies still see that as like potential revenue. So they take those moonshots and often falter trying to hit it. So we're in this position then where there's fewer games that can be made by big studios. Everything's more expensive now. A large portion of people playing games are only interested in very specific games or platforms. And then on top of that, the things like the physical media stuff, yeah, the majority doesn't necessarily buy discs anymore. That's true, but this has created a gigantic wave of bad press that I don't think is going to be easily forgotten. It'll die down, but I think it will pop up again. And you add all those other things with that, and it's just, they're potentially promising this box where the only real difference might be, you're going to get, 120 frames per second now, or slightly higher resolution, stuff that I don't think the majority of people even care about at this point. This generation as is already, I would say, the most 60 FPS games we've had since like the 16-bit era, which was a very different type of hardware. But now most games are 60, right? I think we can agree on that. On consoles, most games are 60. There are some examples of games that fail to hit that target, right? Some big games, sure. But I would say the overwhelming majority is just 60, which is a dream that we've wanted for a long time. We're in really good shape in terms of performance. And I think for the average user, image quality is probably good enough, unless you're sitting really close or using like a PC monitor. So I guess the question is knowing all of those things, how do you sell a new console in a way that's appealing to enough people to make it worthwhile?
Yeah, it's an interesting point.
I don't know.
An interesting point, because essentially the argument of improved image quality and resolution, that kind of thing, was the promise of PlayStation 5 Pro, right?
Yep.
And it was delivered, but it took time. It took time for the second generation PSSR to come along and basically address those issues. And I think there is an interesting point there that PS5 Pro is doing a lot of the heavy lifting now in addressing those problems that the PS5 has got, to the point now where it's routine that we're recommending the Pro version over the base PlayStation 5 version for the best console experience. Looking at this one more holistically, though, the problem is that the PS4 generation had severe problems in terms of the hardware balance, right? You had a weak CPU, you had a spinning rust hard drive, as it's been referred to. The new consoles addressed those core issues. The CPU, obviously, it's probably turned out to be not quite the leap that we thought it was, but it's good enough. The storage issue is addressed to the point where I still don't think that the medium is being properly exploited by most current games. which is interesting. There's definitely room to do more there. So what can the next generation deliver? And it is going to be coming down to stuff like path-tracing, enhanced ray tracing. And I think that's great. And I think you could get a proper generational leap out of those features. But at the same time, if these consoles are going to be expensive, then we're facing a problem here in that these games have got to scale across a wider array of hardware than ever before. And if the same games are appearing on PlayStation 5 and PlayStation 6, the urge to upgrade is going to be deadened somewhat. If you look at the sort of differences we see in games between high-end PC and PlayStation 5 now, the target of those games is still PlayStation 5, right? So you're getting iterative upgrades as opposed to that particular high-end platform being the focus for development, and then the lower-end systems being unduly compromised. That's probably not going to happen. So I do think that if you're looking at something like, let's say, for example, Alan Wake 2, it's fine on a base PlayStation 5, right? It's pretty good. Mm-hmm. You've got your 60 FPS mode. Well, it's a bit wobbly, but it does the job. 30 FPS quality mode looks okay. It looks iteratively better on PlayStation 5 Pro. It looks a lot better on PC with improved image quality. But the point is that you're still playing the same game, and it still looks perfectly fine on the on the sort of standard system. I think that's the problem there. But the PlayStation 5 Pro, it does give you that extra refinement at the moment. I kind of see where Alan is coming from here. I think there is a huge caveat to all of this, though, which is that we've yet to see the pitch that's being made by Sony and Microsoft for these new machines. And this is the challenge that they're going to be facing at the moment, which is they've got to, more than ever before, justify this new hardware. I think they did a pretty good pitch with the last generation machines. But arguably, they've got to do an order of magnitude more work to actually justify what could be a $1,000 console next time around. Really interesting. PS5 Pro, I think they are going to shift a lot of units because it's going to be the best way to play Grand Theft Auto 6. I think that's that's the bottom line. Any final thoughts, Oliver?
Well, Alan Wake 2 is a funny example because that's actually one of the more extreme examples in favor of PC, and even still in your telling, not that significant in some ways. Perhaps it still runs fine on PlayStation 5. But like you look at a game like Assassin's Creed Black Flag Resynced, or certainly the recent and gorgeous Halo Campaign Evolved, and those are games that kind of have everything on the consoles. Like they have all the RT features, they have like good performance, acceptable image quality broadly. I mean, Halo has that film grain and chromatic aberration, which hopefully they'll turn off. But once they turn it off, I'm sure it'll be fine enough. And they basically hit every single mark that you could want. All the upgrades on PC are kind of like win more upgrades. Like, wouldn't it be nice if the frame rate was 120 FPS? Okay, but 60 is fine, right? Wouldn't it be nice if the game was upsampling to 4K instead of like 1440p? Okay, but it looks fine. These are all kind of iterative upgrades. And at the moment, we do see a lot of those upgrades on PS5. I completely agree with John that PS5 Pro is likely to ameliorate performance issues that you see on PlayStation 5 versions of games that we see in the future. But I do think it probably is going to be the case as well that the red carpet is not going to be rolled out for PS5 Pro as much when the enthusiasts are moved on to the next generation consoles. I think that's probably the case as well. My current kind of bet here is that any current generation hardware will suit you fine for a while. PS5 Pro is definitely the safer bet, but if I was being prudent as the kind of prudent enthusiast, I'd really be saving up my simoleons for the PlayStation 6 down the line, because I think it will be a better experience for enthusiasts, but I don't know that will appeal to the mass market in the same way that like a PlayStation 5 did, where you could easily say, hey, 60 FPS gaming, ray tracing, all these nice features, new things, SSD, these are not novel features on a PlayStation 6.
Yeah, I think there's an issue here where, you look at some guy person's questions here and all of the key points as to what PlayStation 6 will do better than PlayStation 5. It's all stuff that's kind of like reserved for high-end PC enthusiasts almost. 120 hertz, better upscaling, path tracing. It's the sort of thing that people are happy to pay extra money to experience. But is that the same kind of pitch you can make to a mainstream console buyer? I don't think it is. So you've got to come up with really good software. And that's my worry here, because there's such a critical mass of systems out there that will be operating at a much lower power level that it kind of makes commercial sense to ensure that the game delivers a great experience for that class of hardware. And I think that's why I chose that Alan Wake 2 example, because you can see that obviously you can get much better results from PC. You've got your ray tracing, you've got your path tracing. It looks incredible, but the hardware that people already have is kind of good enough. So yeah, it's all about the pitch there. Okay, let's move on. Right. Interesting question here from Snorlax Cat. I keep my Xbox One S as a remarkably cheap 4K Blu-ray device. So if we have a new pandemic, I can watch my physical movies. Do you think people will hold on to their PS5s and Series X as I plan to? Because they will, at least PS5, lol, be able to play the games that are on disc completely to be installed, or that this minority will just be as small as people who keep their PS3s to play backlogs that will never be ported, like GT5, GT6, or MotorStorm. So, yeah, this is an interesting question that kind of strikes at the heart of the physical media discontinuation, John. And, also for me, I think a reason that a lot of people would consider an upgrade from PlayStation 5 to PlayStation 6 is basically that they can take all of their games with them. Right now, as things stand, we have no indication from Sony that you will be able to take all of your library with you from PS5 to PS6, because there's no answer to the physical media question. So what do you think about this? Will people hold on to their PS5s and Series X? And I guess by extension, do you think they might move on to a different platform because it's represents a jumping off point potentially?
Oh man, that's really hard to say for me, because I think it's just going to vary depending on the specific person. And there's different categories there, right? There's going to be the people that maybe can't afford a new system and they're just happy to keep their old system around. But a lot of people in the past, when a new machine comes out, they're ready to sell their old one and get on with it and just move over. In my case, I like to keep all of my old hardware, even when new hardware is released. But I recognize that's not what everybody's doing. But I feel like this jump specifically could be a little different depending on how it goes. Just we've never had, if things cost what they might cost, what we think they will cost, we've never had a leap in price this gigantic before, ever, and we've never had so many features being removed all at once. So it's like we're taking things away from you and we're charging you way more money. That's a really tough situation there, and I could see a lot of people just largely being like, well, I'll just stick with what I have for now, especially if the cross-gen stuff continues for a long time, which I think it will. But there's still too much we just don't know what's going to happen. And I think the problem with this kind of question is that we can only look back at what's happened in the past, but I think what's coming is different than any other console transition like ever. And so we can't really look at the behavior of people from previous generations to determine what they're going to do going forward. Like I don't have any plans on spending my own money to get a digital only PS6 like this, and it wouldn't become the cornerstone of my setup like most new consoles tend to. But yeah, it's difficult. We can't say. We're just gonna have to wait and see. And we still owe it to them, I guess, to wait for them to present their case for what it's going to be, right? We can't just say like, oh, we're not into this yet without knowing what it is that they're offering.
Right. Mm-hmm.
For instance, like if Sony was to come out, and I don't think this is going to happen, but if the PS6 turned out to be sort of like a handheld machine, for instance, I think there's two separate machines. But if there had just been that machine, it's a handheld now, like the Switch. It runs PS5 class games, whatever. I think that sort of, if you sell it right and you position it right, it could be more interesting, and that would also help sort of mitigate the lack of disc support, because, well, you're not going to run Blu-ray discs on a portable system. So that would kind of automatically answer that question for a lot of people as to why that change was made. I think that's just an example of how announcing and like the nature of the product could shift the general consumer feelings on something.
Yeah.
But if it's just another console box like this, but costs way more money and has fewer features, we'll see.
Yeah, it would have fewer features, and that's what I think the Snorlax Cat is suggesting here. It's like, well, maybe I should keep this machine in order to play my games, which is not a question that really was an issue with PlayStation 4 to PlayStation 5. It's like, it's got a disc drive. If I don't have a disc collection, I can just buy the one without the disc drive.
And that's the main thing, Rich, and this is really important. When you went from PS4 to PS5, there was no reason to stick with the PS4 if you wanted to upgrade, right? Not only would you get PS5 games, but it would run all of your PS4 software better.
Yep.
This time around, PS5 software largely runs well. It's much better than the PS4 generation. So there's not this real desire to see massive upgrades to performance that we saw last time. And if you actually have a disc collection, you're likely not even going to be able to use it.
Yeah. Oliver, what do you make of this?
Well, I think it's early, a little early in this whole cycle to be talking about this stuff, because I think it's safe to say that we won't see new discs for PS6 and Helix, but we don't know what the state of disc entitlement will be on PS6. We don't know if they'll have a disc digital program. Maybe it's not technically feasible, but it's possible. Who knows? Maybe they'll have some kind of external disk drive attachment. I don't imagine they'll be selling a PS6 with a disk drive natively, but perhaps they could have one. We just don't know. All we have, of course, is the kind of somewhat terse, slightly cryptic 3-paragraph statement that Rich always references that was obviously very negative to a lot of people and sparked so much discourse online in social media commentary. But we don't know what Sony's plans are, and I almost think it's incumbent on them to reveal those plans a little bit sooner rather than later, if they are positive plans at all, because I think people are very, very upset. And maybe, who knows, maybe it's something they could add to the consoles, add to the consoles lineup if people are still really wanting such a device. I imagine they could probably add a disk drive, but at the moment, we just don't know. Assuming, as is kind of suggested here, that maybe the PS6 won't have any kind of disk drive attachment, then yeah, I assume people will hold on to their PS5s for a long time to come. It's a little bit of a trickier situation though than with PS3, because PS3 was such a great platform, especially if you had an original fat model, for playing so much PlayStation software and getting HDMI output, good HDMI output on PS1 games, PS2 games, PS3 games. That's so valuable. And with PS5, the backwards compatibility situation isn't that compelling. You have PS4 games, PS5 games. That's it. Some PS2 or PS4 titles, you can play things like that. I guess now you can play, like, there's some emulated PSP titles, but they're limited in PS1 titles, PS2 titles, but it's a fairly limited lineup, so it's not as appealing as, like, that OG PS3, that nice OG PS3 that can run BC so nicely.
Yeah, Oliver, I like your PS3 point. I mean, that thing could even play like SACDs. It's like CDs, SACDs, DVDs, Blu-rays, all
Everything.
Different generations of PlayStation. Like, there was so many things that it could do. It's kind of cool. I guess the one thing we learned from the last couple of weeks with both the PlayStation and the Xbox online outage, which prevented people from playing games, is that if you were worried about the consoles always being online, don't be, because they're not always online.
Oh my God. Dear. Well, I think that, as you say, we've had both platform holders with outages there. And I do note that, Microsoft owned it. They put out an explanation for what happened. They're looking to make sure it doesn't happen again. I mean, I don't think they can make that guarantee, but at least, what we're seeing there is accountability, right? And communication with the user base. And this is, like, at the moment, Sony's weakest aspect from my viewpoint. They just don't seem to want to engage with the audience. They don't think the audience deserves an explanation for any of this stuff, and it's worrying. Okay.
What's interesting, Rich, one thing I'd heard from a couple sort of sources, and this is just kind of like, potential rumory stuff, but at least before the current Xbox reset, I don't know where it is now, it sounds like Microsoft was actually very much going to continue disk support, not because they valued retail disk sales, but because they wanted to like ensure that all your Xbox games were still playable on new Xboxes.
Right.
Right. And it's like, oh, we could offer maybe like an external drive or basically some means. And I think that might all tie into this disk to digital stuff as well. But I get this feeling that they actually, especially given their reaction, I'm not saying they're going to solve problems or anything drastically going to change, but I do see a future where Microsoft actually supports disks going forward for users that want to take their library with them, while Sony just completely cuts people off.
Right. Okay. Interesting. Okay. Let's move on. Okay, then. So another couple of questions I'm going to group together. This one from Cromulent FX Super Resolution. Hello, Foundryman. With the PS6 graphics power expected to perform around the level of a 5070 Ti and the possibility of SteamOS eventually having NVIDIA support, is there merit to the idea of spending big money now on a gaming PC that will provide 10 years of at or above mainstream level gaming, essentially bringing down the cost per year to a more reasonable level? Or is this simply mental gymnastics to justify the contemporary hardware prices? Probably the latter, to be fair. This one from Raging Whiskey. A crystal ball prediction time. What would you all do? Buy new hardware now, expecting costs to rise, or would you wait, and for how long, before dipping the toe back into PC component / hardware purchases? So I think in the current era, a lot of people are considering moving to the PC for a number of reasons. Firstly, that you have access to a truly dynamic market. Obviously, the pricing does generally tend to rise, and that's not great, but there is competition out there. You do occasionally see some deals. I'm currently looking to sort of build what I would consider, how can I describe it? The most cost-effective gaming PC that does what I want it to do. So, I've got like a mini ITX board that I got off eBay for £100. I got a Ryzen 5 7500F from AliExpress for £86. And basically, the idea is that I'm going to slowly get the components that I need over time when there are what I would consider decent prices. Also, a 2 terabyte SSD. I've got that direct from SanDisk for £160, which isn't great, but is certainly great compared to the direction of travel. But what do you make, Oliver, of the two questions here? It's a tricky one, right? I'm not sure that spending a gigantically galactically large amount of money now in order to have a PC that lasts 10 years is a good strategy.
I think 10 years is tricky. Like if you're to tell me I want to spend big money on a PC now so I can enjoy all these great path-priced games and have a great time, and maybe that will extend into the next generation by quite a margin, that I think is a fair statement. But 10 years, I mean, you've never been able to squeeze 10 years out of a graphics product. Maybe that will change, I don't know. But you never know what kind of feature level requirements might emerge. Even with a 5090, who knows, right? Who knows what the state of driver support will be in 10 years. I do think it's a safe bet to buy, if you want to buy a PC for like $1,500 or something. I think that's a pretty safe buy for a while. But I would not go whole hog on a $5,000 PC expecting it to last 10 years. I think you should just cool your jets a little bit on that prospect, even if I don't think it's a bad idea if you have reasonable expectations for what that machine might be able to do over the next, let's say, 5 or 6 years. I think that's probably an easier prediction than 10 years. In terms of if you should buy new hardware now or wait, I think you should buy new hardware now, if not yesterday. I mean, I have an M3
last year.
Yeah, I have an M3 Ultra Max Studio that I just got. I ordered it months ago, and it finally arrived because of various shortages. But it increased in price by like 35-40% very recently, so I'm really glad that I bought it when I did. I mean, I wish I'd bought it a year earlier, but I guess better late than never, I suppose. But certainly I did manage to avoid that price increase. And I think we're seeing from just about everyone says prices are going to get higher. And a lot of people, including some Valve engineers, are saying that prices currently in the market at retail obviously do not reflect the price of current inventory when OEMs are buying components and things like this, because current production lags behind retail availability typically by months. So, for a lot of products out there, you really should buy now because you should have a reasonable expectation of future price increases baked into those products. Now, maybe there are some exceptions like mice, peripherals in general, mice, speakers, monitors, things like that, things without reasonable storage or memory outlays. But for most products, PCs, consoles, things like that, I think you should buy now. I don't think you should necessarily buy like a 5090 PC now necessarily if that's not something you'd be inclined to normally. But I think you should probably buy now if you have a reasonable thought that you would buy that hardware anytime in the next like 6 months or a year for sure.
John?
Actually, it's a funny thing you mentioned, Oliver, and I hadn't thought about this, but TVs and such displays are still relatively affordable. They haven't massively increased yet, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of was thinking, like, what if this component shortage crisis ended up, and it probably won't, but reducing the number of smart features in TVs going forward? How awesome would that be if they're just like, well, we can't afford to put all that stuff in there anymore, so let's just make a display. I would love that. Just some vanilla displays that doesn't have any of that extra stuff bolted on. Just give us the screen. I mean, PC monitors are still kind of technically that, although as we learned with the LG stuff recently, there's some nasty business going on in that space as well, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, as far as buying now, I think Oliver's right in that at this point, it's like you may as well just buy. Like, there's no, if you're really interested in getting something, things just keep going up, and I don't know when that's going to stop. I mean, do you guys have any ideas on how this could stop? Like, what can be done? Like, what is causing it to continue to increase at this rate? It's reaching a point where I fear like the entire future of computing devices is currently at risk right now.
I think basically that where there is a market, where there is demand, there will eventually be supply. Rather, what we're seeing here is like a sort of one-off shock to the system, right? I hope it's one-off, but eventually the market will have to compensate. I'd imagine there's too much outside of AI that's reliant on this sort of stuff. So there will be mitigations. There will be like new fabs coming online to deal with this sort of thing. The problem is the timescale required to make them. And in the meantime, nobody seems to know how long it's going to be before with this, supply will turn up. The sort of prognostication from people like AMD and Asus and MSI, it seems to change on a weekly basis there. It's looking pretty bleak though in the short term. I don't know.
I also noticed that in the last week or so, Google posted a negative cash flow for the first time since like 2004.
Right.
And making it feel like they're chasing this AI trend so hard, and it doesn't actually seem to be making them money. And I thought about stuff like, okay, if you go to Google search now, everything always comes up with they're just scraping other people's stuff and putting it as a summary. But that also means there's no more platform for actually selling ads and other traditional things used to generate money from their side. But they're spending all this on data centers, sucking up the world's like supply of RAM, and then they're not even making money on it. And I'm just like, what are we doing here?
Well, they're considering it as a capital investment, right? On what they think is going to be one of the most transformative technologies. I don't particularly see that to that extent at the moment. Yeah, it's tricky. My sort of summary of this question here. Oliver's right. Building a PC that's going to last for 10 years. I mean, some people claim to have done it. They've got their 1080 Ti from back in the day. They're happy with it. But obviously the performance of that component has diminished over time as the demands of games have increased. So yes, that's going to continue, I think. I don't know. I think you can buy a good PC, but maybe not for 10 years, 5, 6. Here's the thing, right? I mean, across the tracking back to PlayStation 4, you could buy a PC that did pretty much the same as a PlayStation 4 for a very, very similar price once you factor in subscription and that sort of thing. But across the generation, the PlayStation 5 got considerably better in terms of what the hardware was delivering versus that PC. The thing is, this generation is kind of like, okay, well, a PlayStation 5 is kind of like an RTX 2080, that sort of class component. And it's still the case that today's 2080 equivalent, which is basically a 4060, it's still basically able to deliver a PlayStation 5 like experience. So yeah, that's interesting. Perhaps there is more legs to the PC in the current era. It's an interesting perspective there. I still think, though, in terms of like, there are certain things, if you're building yourself, I think there are certain things that you probably should consider buying now before things get a lot worse. DDR5 memory, storage, those are probably the key ones. Graphics hardware, there's just been reports that NVIDIA is upping the price of the kits that it gives to the add-in board manufacturers, which essentially accounts for, I think, the chip and the memory. That could be concerning. And that's kind of weird because, we're in the situation where Radeon 9070 XT, RTX 5070, they've kind of like held their prices even since sort of Black Friday last year, where we were telling people to buy. I'm not sure the extent, how long that's going to continue. That's very, very worrying. Curious to see what's going to be happening on the CPU side as well. But I think the fact is there's a bunch of highly capable parts out there in the market already. Maybe it's time to sort of consider some strategic purchases on specific components while prices are kind of like, I was going to say okay, but it's not okay. How about not going to get worse? Okay, let's move on.
Quick little breaking news from friend of the show, Alex and Neil. We've got new sales data being analyzed here on Resident Evil series, and apparently Resident Evil 2, the remake from 2019, is now the best-selling Resident Evil game of all time. And I might argue it's the best Resident Evil game ever, possibly. It's very, very good, but it's now up to 19.75 million copies sold.
Wow.
So surpassing Resident Evil 5, which was the previous record holder. They're very close, but it seems like RE2 might be the first Resident Evil to reach 20 million.
Amazing.
Which is pretty cool. So yeah, some cool news there, right?
Isn't it the case that Resident Evil 4 is tracking to be the best performing remake
of this generation?
Is indeed. It's still heading in that direction, I believe. But currently, in terms of overall sales, it seems like Resident Evil 2 is the king.
Nice. A question here from Yotsuban. Hello, DF! Exclamation point. When I first heard the news about Xbox bringing original Xbox backwards compatibility to PC, my first thought was this would be their first step in bringing back their older library for Helix, which we know will be a PC and play PC games. If Xbox is able to successfully establish backwards compatibility between PC and Xbox consoles, do you think Steam is in big trouble? The greatest barrier for any non-Steam PC storefront seems to be the fact that most PC players already have established digital libraries on Steam. If Xbox releases a PC console hybrid and brings their existing console user base along with them, with their libraries intact, I reckon that Xbox will become a much fiercer competition for Valve. Cheers! Exclamation point. I'm not sure I'm buying this one, Oliver. I think my sort of concern about this one is that the backwards compatibility that's going to come to PC is probably going to be highly selective, or at least selective. Whereas Steam, it's just like you can buy anything, or if you've got existing games, they'll kind of just work.
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, although, I guess it depends. And it's a tricky question because a lot of older PC titles don't run that well and need various enhancements, various hacks to work. Maybe they don't work with modern conventions. Like having UI that's navigable with the controller, right? That's really common when I go through older PC titles, especially games released this is going a ways back, but like prior to like 2012, 2013, oftentimes did not have controller-centric navigation, were not designed for living room play. Nowadays, that's basically cleaned up, but there are some issues with that. And the Microsoft approach of basically running games in an emulator, possibly with, some additional enhancements on top, that is actually a format that probably should work pretty well until the end of time, as far as we're aware on this class of hardware. So that's more promising. But I think in general, just like with respect to, is Steam in trouble? I don't know. I don't really think so. I think if you are on a PC platform and you have access to Steam and you have access to the Microsoft Store, I think you're probably going to trend towards Steam. That's for a variety of reasons, but I'd point actually to one recent example where people who had pre-ordered Halo Campaign Involved in the Microsoft Store on PC were not able to access that game, right? In addition to their litany of network problems recently, which have caused certainly issues on my end with capturing footage for Halo Campaign Involved, unfortunately, on Xbox. Gamers were locked out of that game entirely on the Microsoft Store, and I don't see any kind of analogous issue from Steam at the moment. And there are all kinds of issues here in this space. I guess I just don't know also as well as to whether Helix will support third-party storefronts. It seemed like under the Spencer era that was something that was basically confirmed. Under the Asha era, I'm not quite sure if that is something that's confirmed. So I think it would be profoundly silly to not support Steam, not support third-party storefronts, but I suspect it's something they're at least considering at this point. So that could complicate things, but not in a way that would necessarily be positive for Microsoft. Maybe in the narrow sense, positive for the Xbox Store, for the Microsoft Store, but not positive for the Xbox brand as a whole, nor its sales.
I think the problem here, John, is that maybe there's not enough people who have Xbox digital libraries to present any kind of challenge to Steam.
Yeah, I don't think that this is going to lead to any sort of significant challenge to Steam per se, but it's a good thing.
Yeah.
Right? That's kind of where we're at with it, where yeah, it's not doesn't mean they can challenge Valve. Maybe they will, who knows? I don't think so, but if they can find a way to make software that's been purchased more accessible to people via the PC, that's a win in my book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we've got to applaud what Microsoft is attempting to do here, which is essentially to take those digital libraries and allow wider access to them. And so the concept of like Xbox 360 and OG Xbox emulation for PC, I think it's really, really cool. It's a big deal. I'm really on board with what they're doing there. And if there is a way to basically migrate your physical discs from the Xbox One and Xbox Series generation into digital entities that you can take with you to PC or to the next generation Xbox, that's all really great things as well. It is essentially treating your core audience with respect. I think that's really, really cool. I think it's really, really important, especially in the current era where, all of the vibes we're getting is that it's all about revenue per user, and it kind of rubs you up the wrong way, doesn't it? So the concept of an actual consumer win is a very good thing. So I think that's kind of like why I think it's important, why it's good to see this sort of thing. I do think Microsoft strategically is in a very, very difficult position, though, because, if the concept of the strategy is to basically go back to being console-centric and to produce exclusive games for that console and PC, it's kind of like a rerun of what happened on Xbox One, and that didn't turn out particularly well for Microsoft. There was an alternative strategy, which Phil Spencer and Sarah Bond were kind of like hinting at, which was, hey, we're going to basically migrate towards Windows, and Helix is going to be a box that's like, it will give you a curated experience like a console, but it will also open up the PC experience for you. I'm not sure that strategy is going to be particularly effective either. I mean, why would you just not bring your Steam library over to Helix? What would bring you, what's the motivation to get more involved in the Xbox ecosystem? It's a really, really tricky time ahead, I think, for all of the console manufacturers, because I do think there's a worry that the audience is the same people, gen on gen, and they're going to age out at some point. Therefore, you've got to appeal to a wider audience, and how are you going to do that? That's really, really tricky. Final question here from Teasing Hilarity. Hello, fine gentlemen. Not that long ago, the rumor mill was in full swing on the roster of games Microsoft might port to the Switch 2. Various titles from Bethesda, id, and even the former 343 Studios regularly did the rounds. However, that was before the hardware crunch and Xbox reset. I'm wondering, do you think we'll see any further Xbox ports beyond those already announced for the Switch 2 now? Certainly the hardware's capable, and with pricing the way it is, Nintendo's on track to catch up with the Series install base soon. But then there's that reset to consider. Keen for your thoughts. Thanks and best wishes for the week! Exclamation point. Yeah, interesting question, right, John? Because we were expecting the floodgates to open for Microsoft ports to come to Switch 2. And there's a lot of games there which I think would be really good, a really good fit. You know, Forza Horizon 5 being an obvious example. Halo, Master Chief Collection on Switch 2 would be awesome, right? However, it does seem to be somewhat more muted than we expected. What do you think's going on?
Yeah, I agree. I'm not sure what's going on, to be honest, at this point. That those feel like no-brainers to me, especially some of the back catalog titles. Like you said, Halo Master Chief, Forza Horizon 5, games like that would probably be a huge hit on the Switch too, and quite feasible. But either those plans never existed or they've been scrapped. It's really hard to say at this point. I do think the Xbox reset has changed things internally in a way that nobody external to it can be really aware of at this point. So I don't know. It does feel like they're kind of leaving money on the table by not tackling that platform a little bit more seriously at this point. Although, man, given the install size of some of those games, like Master Chief and Forza Horizon 5 are both north of 100 gigs, I believe. And on a Switch 2, that's not a good thing, to say the least. So, I don't know.
I don't know, Oliver. I always thought that the concept of Switch 1 ports, and I think it extends to Switch 2 as well, is that it was the console that, you know, a lot of people would already have a PlayStation and an Xbox, and they got a Switch because it does something fundamentally different and quite special in its own way. So the idea of bringing those games over to Switch, it didn't really seem like that much competition as such. And yeah, you could make a lot of money from it. I'm curious what you think about this. I mean, surely we should have seen some more Microsoft games on Switch 2 by now.
Yeah, and especially in the age of like this kind of post-platform competition, Microsoft, maybe so, maybe not, but that's the way they were trending. It certainly seemed like they would be incentivized to produce Switch 2 versions. And indeed, we've seen, you know, a good number of them. We've seen the Skyrim Anniversary Edition, Indiana Jones, South of Midnight, which I think came out a couple months ago, Minecraft, obviously, and then, of course, upcoming would be I think in a couple weeks we're getting the Oblivion remastered. I'm sure that'll be lovely. The Oblivion remastered port to Switch 2. And then, of course, later in the year we're seeing Call of Duty. But it does seem like maybe they're kind of hunkering down and just delivering those kind of perennial titles, a little bit more perennial titles. Like the Call of Duties, like the Minecrafts, like the kind of maybe a couple Activision titles here and there, like the Oblivions. And less so games that are a little bit more interesting or experimental or technically innovative in certain ways, like the Indiana Jones. I don't know, maybe that's just reading into the tea leaves a little bit too much, but I think that's probably what's, at least at the moment, that's what seems to be going on. I would have hoped to see titles like Doom the Dark Ages. I think that's probably off the table for a variety of reasons now, possibly, but certainly, you know, I think Microsoft would be in a good position to deliver a lot of Switch 2 ports they aren't currently delivering, but perhaps they're in the pipeline. We just don't know. We don't have visibility into that, but it does seem like Microsoft is maybe shying away from them a little bit. To John's point, though, about very large games on Switch 2, obviously, yeah, the idea of a Forza Horizon title that's like 100 gigs on Switch 2, not too appetizing. Maybe they could slim it down somewhat, but we have seen some gigantic Switch 2 titles recently with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and I think Final Fantasy XIV is the largest Switch 2 title ever, and I think 110 gigs or something like that in that vicinity. People are shipping some very large games on Switch 2. Perhaps it's not well advised. You can do it, I guess. And people seem receptive enough to remake on Switch 2, so perhaps it's something you can get away with, even in that console. So yeah, I'm hoping to see more Switch 2 ports though for Microsoft. I think they're well positioned to deliver them. And, you know, maybe they're shying away from the likes of Master Chief Collection and things like that, given their newfound focus on Halo remakes, but it certainly would be nice to at least see Forza. And I think maybe Forza Horizon 5, Forza Horizon 6, that would be a great game to see on Switch 2 for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. I'm unsure of the extent to which Microsoft views the Switch 2 as like pure competition at this point. All bets are kind of off with the Xbox reset. So yeah, I mean, it's to the point where we're kind of moving into uncharted territory, and it's very difficult to actually predict anything that Microsoft does at this point because all options are on the table seemingly, and also the fact that some of the decisions are just bafflingly bad. You just can't really tell at this point, can you? Anyway, that was the final question. Therefore, the end of the show. So please do like, subscribe, share, that sort of thing. On the off chance you enjoyed it, ring bells for things that may or may not happen. Support a program, patreon.com/Digital Foundry. Please do consider supporting the team. It's very, very important. But that's all from us on this one. Thanks for watching and supporting Digital Foundry. And I guess we'll see you in the next Direct proper.